Okay, here we are. Welcome, everybody. My name is Shirriff. I'm one of the partners here at Triangles.
Hey, everybody. I'm Reagan Zuzarte, ready to talk to you about the New World Order, as our introducer hinted at. So let's dive right in, right? Let's get into it. I think we've got some time, and let's make sure everybody can see it.
Yeah, so before we dive into this stuff, I'll preface to all of you guys sort of who we are and what we do. So we run a MarTech company based in Toronto, Canada. We work with clients, most of whom are household names that I think everybody listening would be familiar with, across a number of different sectors. Everyone from entertainment, CPG, alcohol and spirits, hospitality, entertainment, you name it. And over the course of our almost 10 years now being in business, we've driven what, Reagan, have 150 million more worth of revenue transactions across.
Yeah, maybe north of 200. And CPG, we'll try and cut down on the acronyms, because in advertising, we don't say the word Facebook out loud over here in these offices and on our platform like it's FB. Everything's an acronym. So CPG, as Ford touched upon earlier, is consumer packaged goods. Anything you can pick up off a shelf. But in terms of what we're going to talk to you today about is how these last 3 months or so has really given us some insight into how the world is changing from in many ways. How consumers are changing, how businesses are changing, what trends are going to stick around, what might not. We have a lot of data to help forecast this. There is no time traveling or crystal ball, but there are a lot of data that we use in our platform. In our work, we spend millions of dollars on behalf of clients across every platform you probably use to properly do what we call data-driven advertising. There's a tremendous amount of insight to be gained, from looking at what's going on. So just let's dive right in.
I think the big, and just to follow up what he's saying is, for everyone who's coming, the next generation coming up, you guys and ourselves included, is that this COVID pandemic and the shift it's had on not just our everyday lives, but the marketing landscape's been incredible. And we're seeing some really, really drastic shifts as far as where people are spending their money, what engagement is looking like. And we thought it'd be kind of an opportunity to share with you guys what we're seeing, and hopefully give you guys some insight and some inspiration as to where you might want to think and how to approach the landscape for those of them who want to get involved.
Yeah, and so we already touched upon this. Like, what we do is we maximize digital advertising ROI with data science, machine learning, a bunch of other key elements that we can chat about maybe in Q&A. Let's start off with talking about the 4 typical phases of a disruptive crisis. That apply to anything, whether it's a global recession, a war, other kind of natural disasters. So, these are 4 phases that are it's pretty commonly held that this is the way things generally unfold. There's the event, there's a phase where you react and respond, a phase where you redirect to new realities, a phase to rebound to the future, and of course, the catalyst for innovation is accelerating opportunities in the new world. As we talk about the New World Order, and as you guys plot and figure out where you want to be with your careers, keep in mind that we're likely in phase 2 or phase 3 when it comes to, and we don't know if COVID is going to cause the places that have reopened to shut down again, but this is what we're generally looking at in both advertising and just in the general financial markets as well. We're on this upward tick over here, at phase 3, and we'll look at some data on the ensuing slides where it looks like we're not quite where we were, of course, before COVID. But I thought there's another way we can talk about each of these phases, and that is, in the language we speak best today, and that's memes. So let's talk about react and respond. From an advertising standpoint, this is what it looked like to us in April, when all of a sudden we go from spending sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a day on behalf of clients to being, okay, everything is off. No commerce is possible anywhere. The next phase was redirecting to new realities. So we were working from home almost immediately. We shut down a bit early just to be safe. All our staff, we were working pretty much on Slack and Zoom, et cetera, within a couple of days. It didn't quite affect us. Most of our staff is in their 20s, just to give you guys some perspective. They work as a cross-functional team of writers, designers, analysts, strategists, even
Data scientists.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were quite equipped to do this. We don't have too many old school ways of working anyway. We do miss getting together and, hanging out in a boardroom and putting stuff down on a whiteboard and team drinking days and all of that. But, we will rebound to the future. And then Q3 launched in third quarter, and it wasn't quite that quickly at the gates, as this meme spells out. And lastly, accelerate opportunities. This is what it looks like when it comes, and we are now starting to see some of the sectors that we work across pick up again, and they're coming full throttle. They want us to have everything back on. It needs to be driving their e-commerce, driving their lead generation programs, their app downloads. And so, we're going to look at some data on what it looks like to rebound and accelerate opportunities for the fourth quarter of this year, which is obviously the last 3 months. So let's take a look at what happened globally. Pre-outbreak, this is the source of this data is a bunch of them that are listed at the bottom. But if you look at the white bars over there, across all these different media channels, this is what the global hit looked like. If you want to start on the left, you can see social media ad spending is down. It was going to be 20% at a tune of 50 something billion, and it's down to 9.8. Online video 5.0, like increased online engagements have been increased heavily, not surprisingly, with everyone working from home and a lot of people seeking news on COVID and things like that. Not unsurprisingly, all the way on the right end of the spectrum is cinema. People aren't going to theaters, right? Out of home refers to billboards you would see on the side of streets or on the highway or anywhere, but even in subways, there's no commuting happening, right? So advertisers drastically pulled back from a lot of these old school, traditional medium, and even things like TV and radio saw, downticks. So let Ford talk a little bit about the categories on which saw spending increases and decreases.
Yeah, this gives you guys a pretty good understanding. The truth of the matter is that everything has seen a pretty heavy decrease because of this COVID pandemic. The reality is that marketing is the first line item in any major budget to get slashed during difficult times, let alone during global pandemics and economic paralysis, the likes that we haven't seen since a lot of people might say the Great Depression. But if you're looking over, obviously, on the far right hand side of things, retail's down. Leisure and entertainment's down, travel and transport. I love to get on an airplane as much as the next person. I don't know when that's going to happen again. And then if you look on the higher side of things, pharma and healthcare, media publishing, and household and domestic. But the truth of the matter is where we come to see this is not just, seeing that everything is down, but the opportunity is to where, to double down as far as where your investment is going to be as far, in putting your media dollars. And again, just because people aren't going into retail doesn't mean people aren't making purchases online. And so what we do is we take a lot of this data that we're seeing here, and how do you apply this to businesses that don't necessarily have an online marketplace? And so for those of you that are looking to get involved in this space coming out of school, and you're saying to yourselves, well, what am I going to do now that the advertising world is in a bit of state of paralysis or disjointed? There is a really, really good opportunity to get involved and look at some of the higher categories on the left-hand side as how to create online marketplaces for businesses that don't necessarily have it. And that's what we're seeing right now, and that kind of translates into some of how we're taking this approach and how to spend clients' media dollars.
Yeah, and I would say actually the opportunities also lie on the right end of the spectrum, right? Because all these places stop spending. Primarily, it's because they don't have a digital delivery mechanism to get to people. So you're seeing movies being released right to stream, right? And obviously, traveling is hard to mimic, but things like people not going into banks. People are looking for a more direct relation. So in the advertising world, if you want to look it up offline, this is called DTC or D2C, which is direct to consumer. So, what COVID has brought about is a lot of businesses and companies trying to accelerate their DTC funnel. So how do we build a direct relationship instead of hoping someone, walks by our store and has, foot traffic to give us their money? I'll speak a little bit to this, in terms of talking about recovery. Last time we had a major jolt to our system at a macro level economically was in 2008, right? The financial crisis that I'm sure a lot of you might have heard of, maybe be too young to really see the effects of that. But what had happened was, the U.S. markets crashed largely because of, bad loans and a bunch of things, bad debt written on housing and a whole bunch of other financial instruments. And it took a long time to truly recover, back to the levels that they were in 07. You can see it took the better part of a decade to recover. Now, COVID-19, while the bottom was a lot lower, if you look at a negative 9.1 in terms of the ad investment, it's a sharp uptick, but we don't know if that's going to stay. And it really, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the US right now, there are a lot of states that are looking at, either a full lockdown or a quasi lockdown. So it's really left to be seen on whether this recovery that was this quick is going to last, right? So it's good to look at it, look at history to hopefully portend what the future might tell us. Here's something from an ad standpoint we thought was interesting. We'll present to you guys. This is a U.S. survey, but this past week we got some results back from the Canadian equivalent. We're quite involved, and I chair the Media Council for the Canadian Marketing Association. So we got some answers that'll pull up on the screen. But basically, the question asked was, when do U.S. agencies and brand marketers anticipate ad spending will resume, or that they will ramp up their advertising efforts? And you can see this was asked in May 2020, and the answers for the most part were pretty optimistic about July and maybe the fall and September, two leading answers. And really Q1 2021 at the very bottom was 5% and 4%. When we queried the Canadian landscape, and this was marketers both on the advertiser standpoint and on behalf of agencies who represent many advertisers, you can see the answers were probably less optimistic. So if you look at the very bottom, talking about 26 and 36% of people thought it was going to take till next year, 1 out of 3, to truly get that advertising back. Some people were a little bit more optimistic, talking about August and October, but it's quite different in terms of people being, and this is the Canadian way. If you are applying for US gigs, it is a more conservative country, and even the advertising over here, it's more tempered. And so these numbers were a bit surprising, but also not surprising because of that red maple leaf up there.
Yeah, so all this is important data to understand as to what the landscape is looking like. But really, where data is great, but what the application of it is really what counts. Understanding, using data as that measurement currency to understand, what consumer behavior changes are happening. And this is some of the insights that we've found and that we've gleaned that we think are worthwhile taking note of and keeping top of mind as we move forward for the rest of this year and beyond.
Yeah, so we walked through again. We've sourced everything. So if you wanted to look up more on that, you can scribble down what's on the bottom. But really, this is Ernst & Young did a survey and did a research methodology that basically helped basically put people in two camps. Those that were eager to get back to normal, the yellow dots on this graph, and those that were cautiously extravagant, as they chose to label them. And you can see from the very top, there might be a 20-point swing in the way they were thought they were going to approach a lot of these elements of their lives. So the way they travel, the way they shop, the way they spend time with family and socialize, the way they buy products and access healthcare. All of these are, at least 1 out of 3 people, 1 out of 2 people, depending on which camp you're in, think that these things are going to change, and potentially with lasting effects, right? If you think about the number of people that, a big category, just anecdotally, that has just accelerated because of COVID is meal delivery, daily meal boxes, even grocery delivery. If you live in Canada, Loblaws, digital, no one cheers for COVID, but this certainly accelerated a lot of their programs to get people, getting grocery delivery at home. So that might be changed forever, especially for seniors, et cetera, where it's quite inconvenient to get out there and shop. Things that are less affected at the bottom over there is, education, banking, technology, but, even things like exercise and, free classes by Peloton was a smart move. I don't know if you guys take advantage of that, but people are doing a lot of stuff at home because they don't want to be in gyms. So a lot of really interesting, fascinating insights coming out of this study. Or do you want to talk about some e-commerce trends we've been seeing?
Yeah, some of these are fairly understandable. Disposable gloves and bread machines and all these kinds of things. Do you want to open up the next graph too?
Yeah. These are basically movers and shakers, right? So the fastest risers, fastest declining categories. again, a lot of this, to Ford's point, is intuitive. Like, we know gloves are needed. We know people wanted to take, restaurants, they wanted to have bread machines and rice and packaged foods and all that stuff in-house. Even weight training, I was on a wait list for, I think, 2 months before I got some dumbbells, and it was really difficult, right? Not as quite as aggressive as toilet paper, but, still hard to get a hold of. And just talking about the declining categories, again, no surprises here, but the numbers are interesting, right? People aren't traveling, they're not commuting, they're not going on vacations, they're not having fancy events and things like weddings. So all of these are down quite sizably, over the course of looking year over year from March 2019 to 2020. And then, let's get a little bit about the why. These numbers from Accenture, I think, spell out a little bit in terms of why these things are changing. People with a little bit more time to, be conscious about what they are putting into their bodies or what they're using their purchasing power to support, really care about these elements, right? And I think your generation is one that has placed values amongst the most important things they look for from a brand. So limiting food waste, being health conscious, making sustainable choices, being cost conscious. Of course, we know COVID has brought about and accelerated an economic depression. So these are things that, more than, at least half the population cares about. Shopping more local, looking at, shopping less often, and then, of course, on the right end of the spectrum, being more altruistic. So it's important to look at the why. Always start with Why by Simon Sinek is a great book if you've never read it, but it talks about truly being able to understand these numbers at an insightful level. 3 more, and before we move on from consumer behaviors, but Exploding Topics, great website to try and assess the pulse on how things are changing. Number one is a 3-month analysis. Now we realize traveling internationally is not possible. Staycation is up 183%. People trying to figure out what are their local options. Again, bars and restaurants aren't coming back online. CBD gummies are up 8,700% in the last 3 months in terms of searching in searches. So people are figuring out alternate ways to have fun. A nail salon, again, with people, we're in based out of Toronto, Ontario. It's partial reopenings up here. People, this is one of the first things they wanted to get back to. 309% growth of the last 3 months. So just interesting 3 that we thought we'd highlight that is kind of dictating the pulse on the way things are heading.
Yeah, so this is kind of just to close things up. We got 5 more minutes, so we'll get into a little bit of questions and answers. Just some key takeaways and adaptations that we've seen and some methodologies that we've taken to be able to navigate these waters. So, I mentioned at the beginning that the marketing is the first budget to get slashed during difficult times, let alone pandemic circumstances that we're all dealing with. So you need to be even more nimble and even more agile and dynamic in what you're doing. So, Reagan, do you want to go through some of these?
Yeah, sure. One of the number ones is, obviously, this is the most obvious thing. There is increased online engagement. So for advertisers, and we're going to speak to this with what we know best, the big takeaway there was programmatic, which programmatic represents all those channels on the left side. Programmatic is just, basically a geek word for saying auction-based ad delivery. So the way Facebook ads are bought, Google search ads, YouTube ads, all of that, even Instagram, video ads, etc. They're all bought on an auction-based basis. And so seeing that drive higher, you get more of the media budgets versus billboards and print and radio is not a big surprise. But with that comes less tolerance for ad wastage. It's given people and advertisers and agencies a chance to pause and say, our budgets are a bit tighter. Let's target a little better and not just follow people around endlessly. I'm sure all you guys clicked on something once and now it's everywhere, even though you have no interest in buying it. So that's called remarketing or retargeting. And, advertisers are starting to be a little bit more wary about that spend being wasted. There's a few more here. Transparency tipping point. Marketers have had time to look at things like privacy and fraud. It's a huge issue in our industry. Things like click bots and bot farms, and we can probably do a whole presentation just on all the ingenious ways that there is ad fraud out there. But people are, and brands and businesses are asking for more transparency. On our ending slide, I'll show you one of the things that gave a lot of people pause and made them question a lot of things It's a very insightful study.
Hey,
So
Reagan,
like I mentioned, yeah.
there's a couple of really good questions here on the right-hand side. If you see they're talking about data privacy laws and things like that. I think it'd be worthwhile.
I don't want to. I don't see them. Do you want to read them out?
Yeah. So the first question is how do we see the future of e-commerce? Do you want to start with that one, or do you want me to take that?
I mean, we could both. I mean, my like this number 4 over here kind of speaks to that. I think every brand has an ambition to build a direct relationship with their customer. And so direct to consumer funnels speaks to that. And then what that means is they, both from a data standpoint, want to understand who their consumer is, what their purchase habits are, purchase frequency, what they like, what they don't like. And so, rather than do it all through Amazon, which, obviously we've seen as a huge uptick over the last 10 years, there's really been a catalyst for innovation for a lot of brands. So the future of e-commerce is, and again, like this is a wide ranging subject, but a lot of brands themselves are focusing on owning that relationship by themselves rather than, just use a middleman or a marketplace like Amazon to drive all those. Amazon's too large to completely get off it for a lot of brands, but a lot of them are trying to own that relationship.
Yeah, and I think e-commerce is an easy one to play with. I answer that one. And you see what's good. Where I think with the opportunity are in sectors that didn't necessarily have online marketplaces. So, things like real estate, things like, insurance, like areas like this where you're traditionally so used to brick and mortar and so used to shaking hands with people and things like that. But those worlds aren't going to be there anymore. And if you take sort of a forward-thinking approach, like you look at buying houses. So we work quite a lot in real estate. We work with a lot of big developers across Canada and the US, a lot of pre-construction deals. There's going to become a time where you're going to be able to buy houses online. And there's going to become a time where you're going to be able to make down payments without having to go into actual sales centers and things like that. So when you think about e-commerce, I would encourage you to think outside the box of traditional e-commerce, like, buying ballpoint pens or socks online, and think about, transactions that you would do normally in a brick and mortar environment that you're now going to be doing online. And if you can get ahead of that curve, you're going to be put in a really good position to succeed. Reagan, next question too. Is AI an opportunity or a threat for marketing? It's a good question.
Great question.
How customers will be protected against the wrong use of data?
Let's take the AI one first. I think that's a great question, and for future marketers, here's the analogy I use. I look at data science, and underneath the AI umbrella is machine learning, and we can spend some time picking that apart, at a different stage. But I think it's both. I think AI is a threat to marketers who primarily take on a function that is, possible to replace. When I say that, I mean things that are cut and paste or regular work that isn't focused on analysis. So thinking about the knowledge work that goes on in marketing, like AI is going to have a really hard time, or even machine learning. We don't have a general AI accomplished anywhere, even with driverless cars, one of the more advanced areas. There still are programming, and they're programmed to structures to respond to the environment that they know. So AI is not going to be a threat to knowledge work, the analysis. And I think Roseanne was the previous speaker was talking about data citizens. And so I use the analogy that the opportunity for marketers it's a lot like what I call like a good NBA analogy. If anyone else is a basketball fan, in even 15 years ago, there was only 2 or 3 guys on a court who could shoot a 3-pointer, and maybe 2 guys. Today, like even your big center, who was once the guy who only stood by the bucket and put the balls in, can shoot a 3. So today everyone can, right? So working with data and like understanding how it can lead to better knowledge, a lot of like the insights we showed you in this deck, it's going to help you in general, right? So whether or not you become a coder or a data scientist, a pure one, or just someone who's comfortable on back-end platforms like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, or things like that, Mixpanel's a cool one in the ad world too, that is going to be a benefit. And AI will never be a threat, at least in our lifetime, in my opinion. If you can analyze that and actually make sense of all those numbers.
I would say the same thing too. AI is never going to be a threat, and we use sort of an analogy over here internally with our team about as good as it is to have a self-driving plane, you're going to want to have a pilot there to make sure things don't go wrong. So if AI is there to help you, but you having a human moderation layer I don't think is ever going to leave, and if it does, we would believe it's a pretty irresponsible decision to allow artificial intelligence to control all your marketing decisions, because there are human variables that you can't account for, and that that need some level of governance. So Last couple of questions, they're both kind of tied in, and these are great questions about protecting against privacy data. So how customers will be protected against the wrong use of data, and then how can we have customized marketing without incurring data privacy issues? Very relevant to today.
Great question. Yeah, and both are linked, right? So that's the big challenge. So even before COVID, what's happening in so a couple of years ago now, GDPR is the privacy regulation in Europe, and recently the CCPA is the California Act. Basically, in a nutshell, it said you can't sell people's behavioral tracking data or their browsing or their selling data. You can't sell it to third parties, and you can't use it even as, before collecting and getting consent by the person visiting your website or your app, which is huge, big shifts and big seismic effects to the ad tech world. And so how do those two counterbalance, right? How do we, the two questions were, where's data privacy headed, I think, and then, how do we personalize advertising without using that? So
how customers are protected against the wrong use of
data. So customers are protected by things like these privacy regulations. The wrong use of data, like every other week, you can figure out there's been a data breach or a leakage somewhere, right? So really a lot of this, in my opinion, the fines and the penalty for wrong use of data isn't strong enough. I think in GDPR is fining people for misuse and collecting data without permission. They're kind of slaps on the wrist, to be honest. But I think that's going to happen as more consumers take hold. I think the brands are doing a better job as well, not being kind of insidious and shady with how they're collecting data. But I think these acts, like CCPA is a good one to look up. They're basically saying, hey, you can use data on people visiting your websites, but you can't store it. So you can't store it with, I'm John Smith and I clicked on 17 pages and I live here and this is my mobile device ID, etc. There is a way, and we call it either anonymized or pseudonymized data collection that is talking about, making analysis on without identifying who these people are. So that is, done at the cohort level. It's what the Triangles.ai system is based on. So the other future of this is browsers are, banning the cookie, and you can look this up as well. Safari is one of the ones. Chrome is about to block a bunch of cookies. So the future of ad tech is really looking at, some cookieless solutions, and they're out there. Graph ID is one of them. I don't know who asked the question on how deep they are in ad tech, but there are solutions coming out there, and they're promising because they're not, shortchanging each person's data just so that an advertiser can make more revenue.
Yeah, and so look, we're coming up at 1:05, so we're being kindly asked by the people to wrap it up. So that's what we're going to do. But so I want to thank you all very much for joining. And the one big takeaway is this: look, you guys you're coming out of school and you're coming in the next wave of marketers. Use sort of COVID as an opportunity to reinvent how people approach the digital landscape. So the question about how the future of e-commerce. Think of e-commerce not as in selling pens or chapstick online, but go to traditional models that have never used e-commerce before to actually get people to purchase. That's where we see a lot of opportunity. Like I said, whether it's real estate or it's homes or automobiles or things like that, where you would never think of buying them online. That's what's going to happen now, and that's what we're seeing it. So think take kind of a proactive perspective on where the world is going, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do some.
Yeah, and last thing to say, if anyone has more questions or you want to probe at us, we're pretty accessible. I think they've shared our LinkedIn handles, etc. Feel free to connect, and we wish you all the very best in your careers, and whether it's in advertising or data or not, pay attention to the trends that are happening today, because they're largely going to shape what happens tomorrow.
I hope everyone stays healthy. Thanks for coming.